I just want to make a few thoughts on the scandal in Rotherham, which has been a big story in the UK over the last few weeks. To international viewers, Rotherham is a large town in northern England near Sheffield, and it's been revealed that over a period of about 18 years there's been very widespread systematic abuse of young girls in that town, predominantly by men of South Asian heritage, particularly Pakistani heritage. The majority of the victims have reportedly been white, although there have been Asian victims as well. The majority of perpetrators have been Pakistani men. So this poses a lot of questions about not only Rotherham but potentially wider issues. Firstly, one of the main problems with this has been that there has been an atmosphere of not taking the victim seriously. Apparently victims have even been told by South Yorkshire police to come back later and to investigate themselves and this sort of thing. And there's been an idea that the parents have been blamed for that. But it's a very widespread sort of scale. To put it in context, as many as 1,400 young girls have been abused sexually. Rotherham has a population, I believe, of about 120,000, so that's a very significant proportion. And it shows there's some grave social issues going on there. One of the main allegations is that local authorities did not act as rigidly as they should have, and they've admitted this themselves, for fear of offence. For fear that they would be branded racist, for fear they would be branded Islamophobic, whatever. And this has produced a lot of debate. Number one, it indicates that firstly, Theresa May pointed out that this does occur in every community, sexual abuse does occur in every community, but it doesn't change the fact that there is clearly something specific going on here in the South Asian, specifically Pakistani community. And it's not the first time. I believe a few years ago there was a similar case in, it was either Rochdale or Bury. I know it was another town in northern England. Now the far right has put material out there warning about this, and it transpires that this is accurate, this is what is going on. I think it's an absolute abomination if it's true that local authorities did not act through fear of offence, and this is the same sort of mentality that prevents enough action being taken against honour crimes, so-called honour crimes. And I see several problems. Number one is this poisonous political correctness, or perception of it. And number two is denials within the community. Although I should say that several Muslim leaders in the area have demanded that there be action taken against the perpetrators, because whilst the majority of victims are white, there have been young Asian girls also abused, so their daughters have also been victims of this, these grooming gangs. These scumbags basically treat their victims as less than human, and as far as I'm concerned they should be in jail for years, because what they have done is destructive. It's not a trivial crime at all, and it stays with the victims for years. I do think there's a lot of questions to be asked. Certainly local authorities should be taking some heat for the way they have acted for it, responded to it, but I do have questions about the parents as well. I mean, how could these young girls have been in this situation where they were subjected to these gangs in the first place? I'm not a parent, and I don't sort of assume to know what it's like to be in that position, but I don't think it's fair to blame it all on the local authorities, whilst they certainly should take some slack for their weak response to this, a shamefully weak response. I do have questions about the way some of the parents have handled it. I think it's legitimate to ask that. I mean, do they not know what their daughters are doing after a certain time? And by the way, that's not victim blame. Let's be clear about this. 100% it is the fault of the scumbags who done it. It is in no way the victim's fault. But it does make you wonder, some of these victims were very young. and surely parental responsibility has to come into this as well, on some level. I think that is a legitimate question. Anyway, I just want to close with a few other points. What Rotherham shows is that political correctness cannot stand in the way of addressing crime, whether that be political correctness from fear of alleged racism or alleged Islamophobia, or whatever. And this also applies to some communities in London and other cities whereby honour crimes are a very serious problem. Now, crimes just reported in London that a woman was decapitated. Now, the details haven't been released. The police are refusing to release them at this stage. I don't want to stir flames or anything like that. I don't know what it is. But if that transpires to be an honour crime, which is very possible, because it has the characteristics of an honour crime, then it's just another grim example of the fact that this is a very serious problem in some Asian communities. And instead of whinging about victimhood and racism and so on, it is the responsibility of those communities to confront the people in their midst who are doing this, and to hound them out, and to work with the police to help deal with this problem. I'm not calling for vigilante justice, I'm calling for them to work with the police instead of always whinging about racism. Because if there's a situation where the authorities are not acting because they don't want to be accused of that, that's a human factor. And that's still not an excuse not to act, but it's an explanation as to why they might not be acting as much as they should be. And it is a disgrace that there are people out there who would, I mean, already a man who is the government's sorry, I had the material in front of me, but I've lost it now. He was the government's czar in dealing with this, and I'll just try and find the report because I do want to quote this exactly. Bear with me a second. Nazir Afzal, he is the Crown Prosecution Service's lead on child sexual abuse. Now, apparently, members of the Asian community have asked him, Nazir, why are you giving racists or Islamophobes a stick to beat us with? I'm getting this via the British Muslims for Secular Democracy. And they don't agree with that, by the way. They're supporting Mr. Afzal's work, and they're saying that it's ridiculous that he's being attacked for trying to do something about this. So let's be clear, this is not everyone in the community, but those who are speaking out, like Mr. Afzal, are being attacked by idiots, by cards who would rather hide behind the chip on their shoulder and whinge about racism and victimhood and Islamophobia, rather than recognising that some very serious crimes are taking place. And it's all very well saying, oh, well, this happens in all communities. That might be true, but not on this sort of scale. They aren't. You know, you can pick up child sexual abuse in every community, but not 1,400 cases of it. So clearly there is a specific problem here, and it is right that questions are asked. This applies to any case involving crime, by the way. It's just like a large number of gangs in London happen to be young black men. It is not racist to say that, and it is not racist to point out the fact that, for example, black on black crime is a very big problem in London. Likewise, it is not racist to point out the fact that there are Pakistani men in grooming gangs attacking vulnerable young women and girls who aren't just white, they are also Asian victims. But the point here is this toxic political correctness is standing in the way of justice. Now, the far right may shit stir in other areas, and they may fabricate certain reports and so on, but that doesn't mean they're wrong about everything they're saying, and it doesn't mean that I endorse them, not for a second. But instead of constantly obsessing over the far right, I would like to see more members of the Asian community actually just admit this is a problem within their community, instead of constantly whinging about racism. I'm so sick of it. I was just seeing a little segment of a documentary whereby an Asian reporter, I think he's a Pakistani Indian reporter, interviewed a group of young guys in Burnley, again northern England, young Bangladeshi men, and they were talking about going out and finding bitches, and then when the reporter sort of pushed that a little bit, and they kind of backtracked and said, oh, we don't mean in a bad way, but the first thing one of the young guys said was like, oh, you know racism, bruv, yeah. something like that. In other words, he is using the racism card instead of, and this really needs to be coordinated. The people responsible for this abuse need to be arrested immediately and incarcerated, because these are not trivial crimes, they're destructive crimes. But I also think it brings about questions about integration in this country. We should take a zero tolerance attitude to anybody who comes into Britain and thinks that they can use women as second-rate citizens. It's an abomination, and unfortunately there's too many mentalities out there like that. Now, some people will turn around and say, oh, wait a second, you get white guys who have that attitude as well. True, I'm not disputing that, but the problem here is there is an integration issue. There is an arrogant attitude from these guys that they can do whatever they want, that they're immune from the law, because they know that this political correctness exists. Now, of course, we don't want to go down the other line of tarring everyone with the same brush and sort of going down that line, but clearly what Rotherham shows us is that political correctness is poisonous. It stands in the way of justice. Nobody should be afraid of speaking the truth, because some idiot is going to be offended by it. And if you do happen to come from a minority community, I'm sorry if you have suffered genuine racism, but if there are problems within your community, instead of constantly using the racism card, which is completely cowardly, it's a completely cowardly attitude to take, admit the problems. Just admit the problems and stop constantly whinging. This is the country that shelters you. This is your country. So instead of constantly whinging about it, do something positive. And if there are problems within your community, don't use the racism card. Do something about it. Just like as a white guy, I will always condemn actual racism. If it's directed at minority communities, I'll always condemn that. But that doesn't mean that racism can be used as an excuse, as a cover for serious crimes. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, those young guys interviewed in Burnley, they're potential criminals. They should be investigated. If their attitude to women is we're going to go out to get bitches, what does that say about them? It says that, as far as I'm concerned, they're potential rapists. That's bullshit. So, really, it makes me angry, and it's made a lot of people angry. But it does show that this toxic political correctness cannot stand in the way of people speaking the truth. And incidentally, it isn't the entire Pakistani community. There have been decent people who have tried to speak out, but they've been shouted down as being traitors, as being giving fuel to Islamophobes. This is rubbish. They're just honest, decent people who are trying to do the right thing, and they should be given support.